Welcome to our Bible studies. We are so delighted to have you with us. It's a joy and it's an honor. And it's a privilege that you want to spend time with us and share your time. Time is a commodity nowadays. You'll have to forgive me every now and then. I have to clear my ears. They seem to be popping like driving up onto a mountain. They keep stopping up and you hear yourself. And it annoys me when I hear myself. But we've got some great classes. We've got Jared and his class on Hebrews. And we pray that you would spend time to watch them. That is an adult class. We also have Emily and Carrie. They have our younger ones, and I think they're about to close out for the semester, for the quarter. And so we encourage you as a family to sit down, to study with your family, to enjoy, and then to challenge the children with questions and just see how well they do. Kids, it's amazing what they do here, even though seemingly they are distracted. And then my class is on our God who takes our impossibilities and makes them possible if we would just trust Him. One of the things, and one of the problems that seems to invade man is that we like the strings, we like the steering wheel, and we don't want to pass it up. We don't want to give it over to anyone else. But Paul says in the book of Galatians chapter 2 and in verse 20, he said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. He said, in the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. We need to turn the reins over and we need to trust God. Let God direct our steps. He goes before us, He goes behind us, and He protects us. This morning, as we are looking at the fourth miracle that John records in the book of John, we looked last week at the idea of the two fish, 5 loaves, and the young boy did not look around and say, well, what I give is not going to be enough. I can't feed the 5,000 men, 20,000 maybe in all. And that didn't stop him from doing what he could do. Brethren, I find this true of the church. The church is a circle, and inside the circle, you have a pie system. And at certain ages, let's just say that before I'm married, I've got a lot of time, so the pie is big when it comes to time. When I get married, it may be that time element within the pie has to shrink a little bit, and then you've got your children, and it shrinks even more. But on the other end of it, you've got parents whose children are leaving home, and their piece of that pie for available time, it opens more. And so it is what we can all do. We're all inside that pie, if you will. And with the variances there and the nuances and things changing in our lives, we adjust the pie. Of course, the sad thing is some people never grow. That just seems to be their nature. They don't challenge themselves. The pie doesn't open in their life. It is always the same. That's not Christianity. That's just being a spectator. And so this young boy, and stop and think about this story. I remember going to school and my mother would make sandwiches for us, for me and my twin brother Barry. And this time we were at Temuka, a small rural town, and we would go to school, and we had a friend by the name of Jimmy Juris. He was Greek, and his parents owned the fish and chip shop. Now in New Zealand, fish and chips are like a hamburger here. When you think of New Zealand, you think of fish and chips. When you think of America, you think of a good hamburger. And so Jimmy's parents never fixed sandwiches. They would fix fish and chips. And about noon, we'd be sitting out under the trees, and here comes Jimmy's mother, and she would bring him a newspaper with grease paper inside and fish and chips inside. Well, he always had fish and chips. We always had some sort of a sandwich. And so it was exciting to trade out. And so I remember those days of sitting under that tree and waiting for Jimmy's mother to come. And she would slip that package under the chain link fence. And we would trade Jimmy's sandwiches for fish and chips. Here's a young boy who's got some fish and 5 barley loaves. And so the mother, loving and thoughtful and kind of her son, "What are you doing today, son?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to play with some friends." "Well, how long are you going to be there?" And the young boy says, "Well, most of the day." And mother says, "Wait just a minute, just hold up a minute, let me make you some lunch." And so she takes the brown bag and she puts a couple of small fish, probably something the nature of a sardine. And she has just made breakfast, so she has some barley loaf left over, flatbread, pita bread. And she puts that very tenderly into that brown bag. And she sends her son off, and they kiss each other, they wave goodbye, and one goes their way and the other one goes their way. But mother is satisfied knowing that her son has something to eat. And so the son comes home, and the mother says to him, "Son, did you have a good day?" And the young boy says, "Oh, Mama," said, "I had the greatest day. It was a day like I have never had in my life." "Well, did you enjoy your lunch?" And the boy is thinking, if I tell mother what happened, I wonder, am I going to be grounded to my room? And he finally has the courage to tell his mother, "Mother, do you know those 2 little loaves and those 5 loaves of bread, those 5 pita breads that you gave me? I got caught up in a great crowd, so many that I couldn't even count. But I knew it was in the thousands. And a man asked me, did anyone have any food?" And Mama, I just felt compelled to give him the brown bag. And Mama, do you know that not only did those 2 little fish and those 5 little loaves feed me, they fed thousands and thousands of people. And the mother thinks, "Son, you have got a vivid imagination." And then the mother asks, "Did you bring the bag home?" And the little boy says, not only is this going to get me sent to my room, it's going to get me a paddling. "Mama, they took up 12 baskets of food, of bread that was left." You imagine hearing that from your son? He went with supplies to feed one little boy. And that one little boy voluntarily gave up his brown bag. And Jesus fed somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20,000. What a day. That was his brown bag miracle day. And there are times in our lives when the equation doesn't figure out. We're called upon for something, and all that we can do is give them everything that we've got. It may be something that we're doing at church. It may be something that's going on in the community. And we put our brown bag in. And God takes what was in our brown bag. And he can do more with our brown bag than we can do with that brown bag in our stomach. And he fed all those people. Are there times in your life when your little brown bag didn't seem to really matter to anybody, but you gave it anyway and God multiplied it and it filled the need and we had something left over? Look in this miracle, and what we have entitled this lesson today, last week we looked at 2 fishes. Now what I want to do is I want to look at the idea of count the fishes. Count those fish when Jesus gets involved. And so in the book of John, in John the 6th chapter and in verse 13, therefore they gathered them up, and this was after the meal of 2 fish, 5 loaves, that fed over 20,000 people. Verse 13, therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. One lesson that I learned from the brown bag is that if I, and brethren, it is only you who can be accountable for what you do. And it's not in comparison with what others do. My giving is directly related to my trust in God. And when we become generous givers, God will bless us. We have the choice of 2 attitudes, and that is, when I give my 2 fishes and my 5 loaves, I can say, well, the more I give, the less I have. Such a worldly attitude towards God. When I look and I see all of the blessings, not just the blesser, but I look at the blessings that God has given from my 2 fish and my 5 barley loaves. And so the lesson that I learn is that God can do more with what is in my hand than what is in my stomach. When it goes to my stomach, I have enjoyed it. When I give my brown bag to God, he can bless it beyond measure. He can make it bigger than ever before. But also, I learned this lesson, and the lesson is, if I keep giving, God will keep multiplying. These are the lessons that I learn in my life when it comes to the very idea of let's count the fish. When Donna and I married, and I've learned giving from several people. I have learned it from my parents. I have learned it from Donna's parents. I had a dear friend, still do, Larry Pruitt. And I remember once I thought Larry gave an exorbitant amount of money. And I once asked him, and we talked about it, and I've enjoyed being challenged by others when it comes to giving. And so if I keep giving, God keeps multiplying. And God has blessed the life of Larry and Brenda, who now live in Coleman, Alabama. He has blessed their lives beyond measure. The first thing that I want to talk about this morning has to do with if you want to give this points, and that is the giving game. You've got your 2 fishes, you've got your 5 barley loaves. I've been preaching for about 47 years. And in all of that time, I remember baptizing a couple in Florida, J.K. and Heather Kelly. And I know they won't mind me using the illustration. They're not ones to boast or brag. But right after baptizing Heather Kelly, she wanted to talk to me, and she came, and it was about giving. Mike, how much should I be giving? And it's not illegal. It's not how much have I got to do to get by, or how much have I got to give mechanically. Her expression seemed to be, Mike, how much do I have to give to please the Lord? And I think, and I told her 10% is a good place to start. And when Donna and I married, learning lessons from her parents, from my parents, from other friends of mine, that we have challenged each other. 10% is a good place to start. And I know we don't like the word tithing because somehow that holds us accountable. But folks, I don't see any difference between tithing and purposing. We are told in the New Testament that we are to purpose, to give as God has given to us. And so, in the very beginning of our marriage, Donna and I had purposed to start with 10%. There were times, brethren, and I'll be just as honest as everyone else. My wife and I, Donna made about 3 times what I did when she was at Druid City Hospital. And the day that Rachel was born, she decided that she was going to get out of the working force and raise the children. And so we were preaching for a country congregation, and Rachel came along. And you stop and think that if right now your salary, your household income was cut 2/3. And so within about 3 months, I had decided that I just could not make it with Donna out of the workforce and living on what they were paying. And so I talked to them and decided that I was going to move. When we moved, 18 months after the boys were born, Rachel was born, the boys came along. And so within 18 months, we had Rachel, Joshua, and Caleb. And the congregation that I'd moved to paid better, but then 2 children came along. And Donna still wanted to be at home to raise the children. And so we had to go on the WIC program that purchased certain things to help feed the children. And I remember one day Donna came home in tears. One of the ladies of the congregation saw Donna using the WIC vouchers and made some statement to Donna, but also to several other ladies of the congregation. And that hurt Donna. That hurt Donna terribly. It's not as if we were leeches. We have always, for 47 years, both of us, when we worked, have always paid Social Security and our taxes. The government gave us nothing. But we still, deciding to give 10%. It wasn't something that we decided on a weekly basis. But I must say that there were times when something would come along that would so demand our finances that there were weeks that I'd back down on that 10%. That has not been the case in over 30 years. We pre-decide. Then in my life, I started collecting and working on Volvos, and sometimes people would call me. We heard that you're the Volvo man, and they would give me a Volvo. And I remember several times that they would give me Volvos, and one of them was a beautiful one. And the only thing wrong with it was a fuse, like a $1 fuse that ran the fuel pump. And I called him back up and I said, this is all that's wrong. Let me give the car back to you. And he said, no, my daughter really didn't like it. And so I was able to either give away to poorer people in the congregation an automobile. Sometimes I'd sell it. But people would say, you're the luckiest. And I thought to myself, luck has nothing to do with it. I give. And God multiplies. And he always has in my life. And so I stop and think about the first lesson is the giving game. Now, let me suggest to you that you are never going to win the giving game with God because he outgives you. Brother Bill Nuxie from Inverness, Florida, would constantly say, you can't outgive God. We give to God with a shovel, and he gives to us in a dump truck. But when I stop and I think about this giving game, giving the two and having it multiplied, I realize that you cannot bribe and you cannot manipulate God. God is not going to be your slot machine. When you give in order to get, you have forfeited your deposit. And so, the difference is when we give and God multiplies, the more we get, the more we can give. In our giving, we're laying up treasure for ourselves in heaven. And that, I think, is where it needs to be. Nothing that you and I can do is going to outgive God. And he blesses more so that we'll have more to give. Let me suggest to you that God will never, ever shortchange you. Another lesson that I want to give, the first one being, is the giving game. The second point has to do with the great things that God can do in our lives if we'll trust him. If we will give him, he will multiply. Let me give you two, and these don't seem to be that big. But my twin brother went into preaching. He was a master builder. And when I say master, I mean he had gone to the top and was building mansions. And he decided that he was going to go back to school and become a gospel preacher. We had a dear gentleman who was in the oil business in Texas. But that was not his calling. That is not something that he enjoyed. And so he moved back to Inverness, and he had a lot of land there. And my brother was speaking at Inverness, and he got up and he was talking about his need. And Charlie came up and he said, how much does he need? And I said, Charlie, anything that you could give will help. And Charlie had several others in front. He would do his best to help people on missions or preaching or churches that were struggling. And about a month later, he came by, and as he was passing me in the aisle, he said, Mike, I put an envelope on your desk. And so when the day got closed and I got free, I went and I looked in that envelope, and there was $10,000 in a check made out for my twin brother. Do you think that made a difference? Here at this congregation, we had a sweet, sweet lady. To look at her, you wouldn't think that she had two nickels to rub together. But when she passed away, she left the church in her will about 100,000. And God blessed that. That opened the door because we had maximized the space and the attendance of our old auditorium. That allowed us not to knock on the door of this is what we'd like to do. We had been there before. But with the blessing of this sweet lady, it allowed us to open the door, and God blessed us with a new auditorium. And so if you do have two fishes and you give those two fishes, God can multiply it. He can bless. It's not just one person. It's everyone working together. the third point that I'd like to give, and that is the very standard of our giving. And I don't know that anyone has outgiven John Wesley. John Wesley decided what he would do is he would live on a percentage of what he made. And so when he was young, he was making about 28 pounds. He was an English theologian and preacher. And he decided that he was going to live on so much, a percentage of that 28 pounds. And so when the 28 pounds went to 30, he still lived on the percentage of the 28%. And then it got where he was making 30,000 pounds a year. That's a lot of money. And so he still lived. He lived on the 28, or the percentage that he lived on when he was making 28 pounds. He said if he had enough money to take care of his family, things like utilities, he'd rather give it away than store it up here on this earth. And so by the time he died, and he died with just a few coins in his pocket, Wesley, according to today's standard, would have given away into his contribution and his charities almost $1.8 million. And so the standard of our living ought to be the more that I have, the more that I have to share and to give. Not get bigger cars, bigger portfolios, and bigger houses. And that seems to be what we do, because we are in part a very covetous people. We somehow believe that things define us. And so if we could live on that percentage, and the more that we're blessed, the more we can give to God. We cannot, and I want you to listen carefully, we cannot outgive God, but we can rob him. And I do not want to be a person that stands before God in judgment after he has showered his blessings on me, that I have built my storehouses and they overflow. I don't want to be a person that's robbed God. And so the most celebrated giver in the Gospels is the widow. She gave very little, but she gave everything she had. She had the 2 mites, less than half a penny. Really, it's not about how much she gave. It's how much she had left over. And so when I think of the giving game, I think of sharing with others. Let me close out with this thought, and it has to do with 7.5 feet. You remember that Jesus came and he said to those in John 21, verses 1 through 14. Now, there wasn't a better fisherman than Peter. Fished all night. The average boat would be somewhere in the neighborhood, probably of about 8 feet wide. And Jesus came, have you caught any fish? No, we haven't caught anything. And Jesus said to them, cast your net on the other side of the net. And they did. And they caught 153. Now, there's one thing I know about fishing. Are you ready for this? Fishermen count their fish. They measure their fish. They weigh their fish. This is Mark Cunningham. And Mark has learnt the closer you hold the fish to the camera, the bigger the fish gets. But let me tell you, Mark is a great fisherman, along with his son Brett. And so when you ask Mark, how big was it? You don't get a measurement, you get a guess. But Mark is so good, he can get it right on the ounce. I want you to notice as we close out, we have been fishing all night. And Jesus said, just cast your net on the other side. And Peter thinking, what does this man know about fishing? I was born in a fishing boat. I know all about fishing. And he tells me to cast my net on the other side. But I want you to notice, Peter said, because you say so, we will do it. I will do it. And so if we want to be the beneficiaries of great God working in our life, doing these great things, not only, it's not enough to believe, but Lord, because you say so, I will do. We have to position ourselves, and then we have to cast the net out on the other side. And brethren, God will take those 2 fish, and he is in the multiplication business. He will multiply it. The more that I give, the more I have to give. Ought to be the philosophy in our lives, laying up treasure for ourselves in heaven. Thank you for being with us, and we pray that you have a great day. Next time we're together, we are going to look at the 5th of the 7, really 8, and we'll talk about that, miracles that Jesus did in the book of John. Until we get to see each other again, may God richly bless you.